chapter 13. This is actually a personal one of my favorite chapters because it's the intellectual part of myself is very much satiated. It's intellectually rich because it goes into what is nature and spirit. His chapter is the discrimination between matter and spirit, or the way of matter and spirit, Prakriti and Purusha. It lays the groundwork for the Samkhya philosophy of the 24 principles that comprise nature. If you understand it, you've understood renunciation. And man, what a topic! What a topic, man. So, I mean, covering the Gita these days is not an easy topic, but we're more than halfway there. So let's do it. Let's do it. Matter and spirit. Where to begin? So Arjuna begins, he asks the question, matter, this is Prakriti. Spirit, formless, the Purusha. Purusha also means the person, because that spirit pervades each and every single person. And both of these are in reality nature. Nature has a higher and a lower nature, a form and a formless aspect. So you can say that Prakriti and Purusha both comprise your nature. And there is a single field which is beyond even Prakriti and Purusha, and that is what is known as the unknowable, eternal, and unchanging, nameless. So that's the immeasurable. So we'll begin. Arjuna says Prakriti and Purusha, the field and the knower of the field, knowledge and that which is to be known, all this, O Keshava, I desire to learn. So, Kunti, the son of Kunti, Krishna addresses Arjuna. This body is called the field, and he who knows it is the knower of the field by those who describe them. So, we say Prakriti is the field, and this body is comprised of Prakriti, nature, of the 8 aspects that are being referred to. The 5 elements, the mind, intellect, the 5 elements, intellect, ego, and understanding, discernment. And say that the Purusha is the underlying stratum of the formless. It's almost like the unmanifest aspect. Because as soon as we say it, it brings into existence. It's also like Shakti, the energy of nature. That is very much alive. It's not just empty space. It's not dead. Space is alive and intelligent. So, the knower and the object to be known is the knower of the field. This is the Purusha, the formless. And you're moved into subject and objectivity. That the subjective nature is the Purusha, the knowing quality. And the objective nature, that which is to be known by the knowing quality, is the field. Knowing this is knowledge. This is knowledge. But the object of knowledge is the knower. So he goes, know that I am the knower in all fields. So that which is, who knows the field of nature, I am that. O Bharata, and know that the knowledge of the field and its knower do I regard as true knowledge. So he's establishing the terminology here and the definition. Knowledge is to know the field and the knower of the field. So, basically, to know matter and spirit, to know Prakriti and Purusha, know the form and the formless. I'm going to refer to as the field and the knower of the field. And the field is the body. You have everything you need right here. This is your nature. Form. That which is beyond it is the formless. The one who knows the form. And these two are always in union. And are actually not two, but whole. So hear me briefly from what this field is and what its nature is, what its modifications are, where it comes from, who its knower is, and what its powers are. So this has been sung by the sages in the past, even through the philosophy of Samkhya. And it's been told in many different ways. So the way that it's being described now is very distinct. It's making the terminology very precise. It's told in various hymns as well as in reason, like in Samkhya. I'll explain these 24 principles of understanding it. And then the convincing passages indicated of Brahman. So, without this understanding, you're going to be going through a maze of a myriad of concepts. It's like listening to this dialogue. If I'm doing a service, I'm not here to fill you with more concepts. Remember that the true knowledge here is to discern what is the field and the knower of the field. If that's being communicated, then the essence of the Gita is cut right through. It's not to fill you with more concepts and more thoughts. So the field is described. The great elements: space, wind, fire, water, earth. Okay. The I consciousness, ego. Like when you say I did it. It's mine. It's ego. That I consciousness is your nature. So the 5 great elements: I, understanding, is your ability to actually discern. And the unmanifested. The unmanifested translates as the avyaktama. Basically, that's the knower of the field. And then, so this is Samkhya here. This is how it's being described. And then the 10 senses. These are the 5 senses of action and the 5 organs of perception. So the 5 organs of action would be the mouth that speaks, the feet, the hands that express, the ejaculating aspect through the sexual organ, and the evacuative aspect of the anus. The organs of perception being the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin. So, the mind, and then the 5 objects of the senses. This is the sound, the sight, the touch, the taste, and the smell. So, desire, hatred, pleasure, pain, the aggregate, intelligence, and fortitude. This briefly described is the field, together with its modifications. So, now you have within those qualities pleasure, pain, neutral, etc. All the aggregates, the intelligence, and that quality to a bear. That's the energy of the gunas there, and the various modifications and the spinning of the energies. But understand that all of nature is being described here. If you understand everything that's changing, everything here that is just being described is in a constant state of change. And where we lack knowledge is we don't understand these principles. We don't understand nature because we have an ego and we mistake it for I. Like, I am the sense, I am the smell, I am the touch, I am the body, I am my thoughts, I am the earth, etc. It's I'm saying that the ego is a false identification. It's just an aspect of nature, the form. And you can worship the form like Krishna does. He'll gladly say I. And the identification of it, he knows the knower of the I. See, the knowledge is that who knows the field and the knower. That's true knowledge. So this comprises... let me move back ahead of my... This comprises true knowledge. Actually, because there's 24 principles that are outlined. This is the essence of Samkhya. Is that, okay, so going from the gross, you have the 5 elements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Space, fire, wind, water, earth. Okay. You have the 5 organs of action. For space, you have speaking. For fire, you have walking. For wind, you have grasping. For water, you have ejaculating. For earth, you have excreting. This brings you to 10. Okay. Then you have the objects of the senses that are extensions of the 5 elements as well. For space, you have sound. For fire, you have sight. For wind, you have touch. For water, you have taste. And for the earth, you have smell. This brings us to 15. Then you have the organs of perception, which are also modifications of nature. This is for space, you have the ears. For fire, you have the eyes. For wind, you have the skin. For the tongue, for water, you have the tongue. And for earth, you have the nose. This brings us to 20. So 21 is manas. This is the intellect. That which then is able to, through volition, mental formation, you can form the senses and reach for these various objects. You can steer them in directions. This intellectual faculty is mind, with a small m, intellectual. And 22 is ahamkara, the ego, the sense of I, me, and mind. You falsely identify with any of these, the organs of perception, the objects of perception, the organs of action, or the 5 elements, and interchanging I, me, or mine on any of these. And then you have 23, which is the understanding, buddhi. This is the intelligence that underlays the whole field. The discerning aspect to discern truth from falsehood, the self from non-self. So everything I've just explained is non-self. If you look for yourself in any one of these things, you can't find it. Look for yourself in the space, where are you? Look for yourself in the fire, where are you? Wind, where are you? Water, where are you? Earth, where are you? So this is non-self. That which knows it all is the knower of the self. And this is 24, the unmanifest knower, the Purusha. So this is what underlays all the form, the unmanifest. There's also, that 24 is the root of numerology, as well as there's 24 syllables in the Gayatri, one of the oldest Vedic hymns that Krishna even praises in chapter 11 of the hymns, I am the Gayatri. These 24 letters and 24 syllables correlate with these 24 principles of Samkhya. And even the Jnana Yoga, the yoga of wisdom that's taught, has its origin in Samkhya. Krishna is even saying, of the sciences, I am Samkhya, the science of self. It was highly praised as a science to direct self-actualization. And understanding the knower of the self, which is the underlying unmanifest, number one. Everything that happens after the 23 other principles beyond number one is the field of consciousness. That's the field. And the unmanifest, the Purusha, knows all those principles, knows it. If you grasp that, that is knowledge. True knowledge. Because now you have discerned changing from the unchanging. And very important. So we shall continue. So, and this is highly intellectual chapter. But the science is important to learn. Maybe if we get time, we can study deeper into this, as it's such a fascinating topic. So these are the qualities associated with knowledge and as a means to attaining knowledge. So humility, modesty, ahimsa, this is nonviolence, forbearance, uprightness. It means it's like there's fortitude in you. And then service to the teacher, and you're willing to help, purify, purity, steadfastness, and self-control. There is also dispassion towards the objects of the senses, because you have you recognize the discerning faculty, buddhi, as the principle number 2. After principle number 1, you have the knower, and then you have the discerning faculty of that which knows. You discern the knower from the field, and already we have polarity. So this discernment of the objects of the knower and the senses is a quality of knowledge, and as well as absence of the ego. I mean, you can tell a person has knowledge when you're not speaking from I, me, or mind. There's a renunciation of the I, me, or mind aspect. And then they can perceive the evils, in a way, of birth, death, old age, and sickness, and pain. That these are derived from a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding one's nature. So that's why non-attachment is praised. Non-identification of self with other. Non-identification of child, wife, and home, and the rest. And the evenness of mind, even in the midst of agreeable and disagreeable situations, because even a child, a wife, and a home is one's karma here. This happens from a lack of knowledge. And it's through that loss of knowledge that one takes action in the world, forgetting the sense of the true self and the knower of the field. And one transmigrates in this field in a round of birth and rebirth. Children, wife, and home is really one's karma to be purified. And it's also one of the main ashrams in life. There's 4 main ashrams that one can spend their life in pursuit. The brahmacharya, you spend your life in being able to learn. And there's the grihastha, the householder life, where you do raise children, a wife, and a household. This is for the purpose of continuing the wheel so that creation and the social order stabilize. And you have those who want to tune in with nature and get back to its roots, live in the simplistic life. This is the vanaprastya. when you're just ready to retire. And then when you give yourself to the spiritual life, you recognize the self, and that's all it is, and you're ready to this stage in your life to renounce the world. That's the sannyasin. But the householder life is said to be the most rewarding, but also the most challenging and difficult, because it's a sense of attachment to the children, the wife, and the home. It becomes the burden, but also a means of purifying. If one has this knowledge, if there is the knowledge of knowing the self and the field, then the children, wife, and the home are the field. You see, and you love the field. The field is Brahman, your womb, and you create consciously as an avatar. So that's right. The virtues that are explained is the unswerving devotion to me, says Krishna, as the form of the self. The unswerving devotion through constant meditation, non-separation. This is, like you're constantly immersing yourself in the true self of the knower. And that's meditation, is this contemplation of steadiness of mind. You resort to solitude. And then the one of knowledge generally has an aversion towards the society of men, because it tends to go against the knowing of oneself. It's the ways of society are generally in the opposite direction of casting a veil over the real nature of the self to further propagate the life of letting the wheel continue on. So constancy is praised in the knowledge of the self as the true knower, and an insight into the objects of the knowledge of truth. And this is declared to be knowledge. The objects of the knowledge of truth are the principles that have outlined the organs of perception, the objects of the senses, the organs of action, the speaking, walking, grasping, evacuating, ejaculating, etc. And then the five elements. Understanding these as your nature, this is knowledge. And that which underlies as the stratum, as the witness, observer of the field, is the knower, the object of knowledge. It's a very simplified, precise terminology that I'm giving you here, outlining. And it's like you grasp this, Samkhya, that even Samkhya, the science, and people argue it's two, Prakriti and Purusha, matter and spirit. That's not what's being said. The unification of the matter and spirit is what's being taught, because the two actually unify. This is yoga. And it's neither two nor one. It says, like Brahman is neither being nor non-being. This is the ignorance that we superimpose now these names. Is Brahman void or is it light? It's meant to be all-pervading. Let's continue, because this is highly intellectual, and I want to stay on the principles here. So the constancy in this knowledge of self is important for the cultivation of virtue, and the object of knowledge is the knower. Okay? And anything other than that is ignorance, to the contrary. So what is realized through this knowledge is that, Krishna says, I will now describe that which ought to be known, and through the knowing of which one attains immortality. It is the supreme Brahman, which is without beginning, and it is said to be neither being nor non-being. So this knowing of the self, when the knower in the field dissolve. And it's no longer two, it's one. This is what's recognized as Brahman, the inseparable. Remember that the inseparability, the non-identification of self with other, the I don't see it. Non-separation, that constant meditation and non-separation, unswerving devotion are qualities of one who's actually attains this knowledge. So the inseparability of Brahman, which is neither two anymore. These are why the higher caste of the social order are called Brahmanas. These are ones who are equal with their identification with Brahman. And as Krishna said in previous chapters, the renunciate is me. I am them. Like, they are dear to me. They I regard as my very self. Whoa. He's not saying anything different here. We'll continue. So, this Brahman, its hands, feet are everywhere. Its eyes, head, faces are everywhere. Its ears are everywhere. Its existence envelops all. This is now the outward extending path, also referred as the tantric path too, of the path of self-luminosity. Of now that this identification of the field and the knower of the field is unified, this unification is Brahman. Okay? The all-pervading with its hands, feet everywhere. This is why the face of Brahma, the creator, is multifaceted, gazing in every direction. See, and the sound is Brahman, the offering is Brahman, the taste, touch, everything is of this nature and described as the touch of bliss. Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. It's existing, even though you can't find it. You can't taste Brahman, you can't touch Brahman, you can't smell Brahman, you can't feel Brahman, but everything arises. The sound, that what I perceive as sound, taste, touch, smell, and etc., it's all there is. It arises as this single taste of bliss. When this sense of a self-identification, a separate self, has been surrendered, what then remains? Even when the ego is recognized as just a modification of the field, and that which knows the field is the unmanifest. And everything that arises in the field, even the sense of I, is manifest. Say it's manifested form. I've arrived. What? I've manifested. And that manifestation, where did it come from? But from the unmanifest. I'll continue. So it's generally, we project stuff onto Brahman. We project its limitations. We project its qualities, just like people project these qualities upon God as being a man with a long beard, old, and in the clouds. He holds a book and writes your notes on the time you die. These are impositions. We call them upadis. And we impose these limitations on our true nature. And the pathway of yoga now, to actually attain this unification, is like you're already unified, you're already attained. But our imposition, our effort and our, because we haven't recognized our true nature, we've imposed many things through conditioning over what our nature actually is. So it said that it shines through the functions of all the senses. It means that it's inseparable from the senses now. And it is devoid of senses. This means that it shines through the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the skin. But it's devoid of the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the skin. And it's the paradox. It's neither being nor non-being. It will arise as these things. But if you look for these things, it is the single state of consciousness of the knower, existence, consciousness, and bliss. For where is the eye, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin, other than within consciousness? deep. This is the most intellectually deep chapter there is. And laying the science out for you. Laying it out, man. So it is without, and it is within all beings. It is unmoving, and it is moving. It is incomprehensible because it is subtle, and it is comprehensible because it is close and near. It is far away, and it is near. So it's the paradox as well, is that it is self and it is non-self. You can't find yourself, and since you can't find yourself, all arises as the self. This is what then is said to be self. And this even unifies even the Buddha Dharma with the what the Buddha taught of non-self. I've had many arguments in many ways with teachers in the Buddha Dharma. I was like, how do you rectify the paradox of the Buddha teaching the philosophy of non-self? And then here we're saying the self is Brahman. But then I'm also saying the self is neither being nor non-being. That you look for the self, neti. Can you find yourself in any of the elements, in any of the organs of action? What about the objects, the sound, the sight, the smell, the taste, the touch? Or the perception, the ear, the eyes, the skin, the tongue, the nose? What about the mind? What about the ego? Can you find yourself in that? Can you find the ego? All arise as the knower of the field, as knowledge itself, consciousness. And this consciousness, existence, bliss, this is Brahman. And impersonal in nature, but manifests as personhood through those who recognize their inseparability. This is what is referred to as a Brahmana, of the highest social order. They're co-creators with the world because they have recognized their nature in the field. And this philosophy of Samkhya, this even predates the Bhagavad Gita. This was actually Krishna. You can tell that his background was actually in this. The yoga that he's teaching is based on these principles of Samkhya. And I'm not sure people actually grasp that it goes back to the sage Kapila, who is a Mahasiddha, an awakened being. Another avatar of Vishnu, another avatar of an awakened one. So I hold great respect for this, because this is the essence of the Vedas here. Predates the Vedas. So it is indivisible, and yet it is, as a word, divided. So it's undividable and yet divided through name and form. That we impose name over the various forms, since these are the upadis, referring to, of the impositions that we now create limitations. We now cast veils over what our nature is of Brahman, the unmanifest, the true self. So that noble Brahman is the sustainer of all beings. It's also their devourer and their generator. It means that it is the source. Again, other chapters, Brahman is the offering, Brahman is the fire, Brahman is the sacrifice, Brahman is the heat, Brahman is the purity, is all things. So it's also not to be understood that since you cannot find yourself, if you're going through a neti, you can't find yourself in the elements, you can't find yourself in the action and in the movements, you can't find yourself in the sensory objects, you can't find yourself in the organs of perceptions like the eyes, the tongue, the nose, etc. You can't find yourself in the mind or the ego. And so this is not to be confused with the metaphor that nothing exists, or that everything is dark. For it's explained that the self, like the mind, the real mind, is that when you look for your mind, you can't find your mind. Like, where is your mind? The real mind of Brahman is the light of lights. It is luminous, self-luminous. It's clear. The light of even the lights. It is said to be beyond darkness. Or it's like darkness is just the ignorance that has not recognized this nature of self-luminosity. Self-luminous because that luminosity is contained within the knowledge of recognizing the true self with a capital S, not a small s identified with I, me, or mine. So as knowledge, the object of knowledge and the goal of knowledge, it is set firm in the hearts of all. So this topic is concluded here that thus briefly has been set forth the field and also the knowledge and the object of knowledge. So the field are the 24 principles that I've outlined. The knowledge is understanding the field and the knower of the field, and the object of knowledge is the unmanifest, Brahman, the knower. So very clear, very precise. So the devotees who understand this, they become worthy of my state, says Krishna. It means like those, if you grasp that equality with Brahman, it means you're equal. And then Krishna says, I am you. I love my devotees, for in reality they are me. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So Krishna says, I am Brahman. Means he is the self. And speaking in embodied form. When he's governed his own nature as the ruler. And in chapter 11 he says, I am the rod, the rulership, and the chastiser of even kings. So what that rulership is the rulership over the field, like a king has rulership over the kingdom. Interesting. So the two Prakritis that are the Prakriti and the Purusha, the two aspects of nature, it can be referred to as higher, lower, superior, or inferior, but in reality they are interlinked, they're inchangeable. We just impose these names upon them for understanding. I mean, that understanding is the discerning aspect, which in each stage you go down to get to the earth as the 24th principle. You're stepping from clear light, all-pervading luminous light, to dense matter. And these are shadows here. And the goal of yoga is the clearing of these shadows, moving beyond the layers to recognize the true self, the self from the non-self, that discerning aspect, and then surrendering even that discerning aspect as a manifestation, that which arises from the unmanifest, the knower. And even the knower is dissolved in the self. So know that Prakriti and Purusha, says Krishna, are without beginning and without end. And know too that all forms and all the gunas are born of Prakriti. It means that everything you perceive, everything you feel, even the gunas, which are the energetic modifications of nature, the active, the passive, the neutral, are all contained within nature itself. And that which knows these modifications, that is the knower. This is true knowledge. And the true knower is unchanging. It is the underlying field, the substratum, in which all the manifestations of even the gods, the goddesses, the devas, the forms, all aspects, the kings, the chieftains, you understand the knower, then you understand that all appearances, all that arise, are the self. This is the true mind, the true self. So the functions of the Prakriti and Purusha are such that the Prakriti means the manifestation of matter. The nature of matter is said to be the cause of the generation of the body and the organs. And Purusha is said to be the cause of both pleasure and pain. So the organs, etc., the organs of action and the organs of perception, these are manifestations of Prakriti, of the descent into matter. The Purusha, as the underlying stratum, is the experiencer, that which experiences nature and is inseparable, the experiencer and the knower. So his birth is neither good. So, let me see. So Purusha is the experiencer of both pleasure and pain. And so how does the self experience this pleasure and pain? It does so through taking embodiment in Prakriti. This is the unification that Purusha, as the unmanifest, it is embodied in Prakriti. The great union here, like a sun coming forth through you, through the union of a husband and wife, and it experiences the gunas, the energies of nature, and it goes up. There's veils being cast because you're moving from the unmanifest to the manifest, and then boom, you have a clump of earth. You have the 24th principle here of the earth and the 5 elements, and then all of the discerning faculty is a subtle layer. And some people, they remember this discerning faculty. Crystal birth, childbirth. But we are all generally born with a veil of ignorance that's been cast through endless birth and rebirths. Aware of the knowledge of the knower and the field is capable of putting an end to these unconscious births and the end to the veil of darkness that's been cast. And the darkness is the illusion that's cast over one's true nature to discern what is true and what's not true. So the experiencer experiences the gunas of Prakriti, means the energetic manifestations, and it is attached to these gunas and is the cause of birth in both good and evil wombs. Now, since the veil is cast, one is responsible now for their actions, both good and evil actions. This is karma, the volitional activity one has, and volition is the mind now, how it interacts with the senses. If you're interacting with compassion, you're interacting with love, you're acting with desire, you're attaching at the objects of senses, or aversion towards it because you recognize that, like, that's not Brahman out there. Brahman is something that I'm going to attain by sitting and meditating for long periods of a time in a yogic retreat. Not through you. I'm not going to attain that through you. We see division. So, the Supreme Spirit, the Purusha, becomes entangled in the world of ignorance, of this veil that's been cast by interacting with the Prakriti, with the nature of the elements, the objects, and the organs of action. And so this Purusha is the witness. It's the observer and the enjoyer. It's he who experiences, enjoys. The supporter and the approver, means the one who likes and dislikes. He is the sovereign Lord and the highest self. Nice, because it's the unmanifest, the substratum on which all beings manifest, and which all beings are portions of this underlying field. So he who thus knows, thus Purusha and Prakriti, matter and spirit, along with the gunas, the energies of nature, active, passive, and neutral. Now, they all manifest as these energies in various forms. This one is not born again. However, he may comport himself. He does not take another unconscious birth. He's transcended and reached the state of the immortal. Because the knower, the Brahman, does not perish. It is only the sense of an individual self and ego that experiences death, an ego death that thinks it dies because of self-identification with I am my body. Hence, the true panacea and the remedy here is self-knowledge. It's not through a doctor, unfortunately. So there are many different paths that lead to this self-knowledge, and however you arrive at this knowledge takes you to the eternal state, the realization of immortality, the deathless. Some by meditation they perceive the self with a big S, the true self in themselves through the mind. Some by devotion to knowledge and some by devotion to work. So either way that you do so, you can do that through perceiving through the mind, like you do through the Samkhya Yoga. You have the yoga of the principles here, and you can discern, okay, not me, not I, not I, not I, that's not me, till you're left at the self, which you cannot find. So all arises as the self. Or you could do it through devotion, which is the yoga of action that Krishna was giving to Arjuna, and it was through action that he purified and earned his grace through devotion to the form, or a devotion to selfless work, which purifies oneself by surrendering the fruit of one's attachment. So the path of liberation for these aspirants, one works according to their capacity. You have high, medium, and lower capacity here, depending on one's ability to integrate this realization. And yet there are some who do not know it by these means. They hear it from others and they worship. They too pass beyond death through their devotion to what they have heard. So some hear it and they don't recognize it. So this knowledge leads to liberation when the identity of the individual self is then surrendered and recognized as the knower of the field, that which knows, as pure consciousness, pure awareness. Hence one is liberated from the sorrows of grasping as something out there. For what would be out there anymore that you would be attached to or be averse from? For all is the self. Hence this true knowledge is the panacea. So whatever is born, said, whether animate or inanimate, moving or unmoving, know, Bharata, that it is through the union of the field and the knower of the field, that this union of the two, of consciousness, which really is everything, and the field, the modification of the active, passive, neutral energies, this is your own energetic manifestation that's arisen, and you can enjoy it, govern it like a ruler, the sovereign. I said in chapter 9, the way of the sovereign. You rule nature, you govern it. And this is what Krishna did by taking his birth. I took my birth and my nature and governed Prakriti, and then I controlled Maya, my illusion, and the veil was lifted. So, right knowledge, it destroys this ignorance, and true knowledge is attained. And without this knowledge, this is how embodied beings come to be, and why births take place, and what propagates this birth. And so it's necessary for beings who want to be in the world, in the householder life, that the veil be cast so that you can continue that. But the renunciate here, to attain liberation, he sees the supreme. He sees the everlasting, abiding alike in all beings. It means the unmanifest Purusha now is not separate from self and other. There is no self and there is no other, so all arises as the self. And not perishing when they perish, verily he alone sees. So now the forms go, what you perceived as form, but the underlying stratum of the formless, unmanifest, remains as the true self. And the results of this knowledge are such that he who sees this Lord, the unmanifest, knowing, present, alike everywhere, he does not injure the self by self, and thus he reaches the supreme state. He has compassion for all life and this love for nature. You see that all actions are only done by Prakriti, his nature, and that the self is in fact actionless and does not do. It is his nature that is the doer of such acts. Verily, he alone sees as the witness and the observer of such acts. And realization of this unity of Prakriti and Purusha leads to the attainment of Brahman, the highest self. And I said, this is helpful to understand that when he sees that the manifold nature of beings is centered in the one, and that all evolution is from that one alone, the unmanifest, he becomes one with Brahman, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Purusha is the knower. Prakriti is the field, and that which is to be known. The object of knowledge is Brahman. Okay. So, this isn't actually the self of all beings. And no matter what their physicality, no matter what their strength is, their qualities and traits, they're unaffected by it. And they have, in essence, no beginning, no possessions, and no gunas. The supreme and imperishable self. O Kunti, says Krishna to Arjuna, it neither acts and is not stained by action, even while dwelling in the body. So one is not touched like a lotus, not touched by the mud or the water. And gives another illustration as like the space that pervades all things is not stained because of its subtlety by the elements. Space, no matter what elements arise within it, is not stained by it. Even so, the self dwelling in the body everywhere is not stained by the elements. So this true self is the illuminer. It is not affected by the objects. It's like consciousness is not affected by the sound, the taste, the touch, the smell, etc., but arises as the imperishable self that has no sound, taste, touch, and smell, but arises as the sound, taste, touch, and smell as the one single state and touch of everlasting bliss. For sound, taste, touch, and smell were just impositions that we impose over the everlasting Brahman. So this kind of chapter is concluded by such that understanding this, the recognition of the self, okay, that which you've gone beyond all name and form, not me, not me, not me, not I, you've recognized the imperishable, unchanging. They perceive with the eye of wisdom this distinction between the field and the knower of the field, Prakriti and Purusha, and also the deliverance from Prakriti, that our cause of birth and rebirth is from not recognizing this knowledge of the field and the knower of the field, Prakriti and Purusha, and the cause of all beings. So Prakriti is the cause of all beings. It is the doer. They who recognize this, they attain the object of knowledge, the supreme Brahman, the imperishable Brahman. Thus, they are freed from ignorance, attain liberation, and are able to finally discern. They go all beyond the sorrows of the world, and this is the discernment, the science of Samkhya, the discrimination between matter and spirit, the science of Prakriti and Purusha. Thus ends chapter 13. And this is the most intellectual one and scientific, as there's so many modifications. And if you grasp that, It's the only thing that has to be known. Knowledge, the field, and who knows the field. The object of knowledge. The object of knowledge is the imperishable, the knower. It's the goal. And may it be auspicious, Sarva Mangalam. Blessings on your journey. May it be so. May it be actualized. This is a state now to go beyond the concepts. Because there are many principles here. Leads into direct experience. And that this can be known. This was stated by Vasudeva itself, the text. It can be known. And when Arjuna's like, the mind is very difficult to control like the wind. How can I ever know it? It is, for sure. But it can be done. This can be known. This is true knowledge. Self-knowledge. Self-realization. Self-actualization. It is the panacea and the remedy. Thank you. It can be done. I'll see you in chapter 14 on the three gunas.